Hi guys, welcome to this step-by-step autumn leaves watercolor tutorial. It's an 8-step tutorial and I take you through each process one by one, and I use lots of yummy techniques. So shall we get started? I've sketched an outline for the painting using an HB pencil onto cold press watercolor paper 9 by 12 inches, and I put some washi tape around the border. For this second stage, I mask out the veins of the leaves. I keep it really simple and I show you how to do it with a sort of a cocktail stick, but also with a brush as well, if you find using kind of a twig or a stick a bit tricky. So I really hope you find this helpful. I'm using a Kebab stick here to apply the masking fluid. You can use a cocktail stick, and it's just because you get very thin lines. I'm using hand liquid soap, coating the brush with the soap and then dipping my brush that has the soap on it into the masking fluid, and that protects the brush from the masking fluid. And I'm masking out the veins on the leaves here. I'm going to allow the masking fluid to dry naturally. This third stage, I paint the background. So I mix up lots of gorgeous colours. So I hope you're going to enjoy this bit. So mixing up just some of the burnt sienna here. I've got orange, I've got some green, I've got some violets, I've got sort of light yellow as well there on the right. So plenty of colours for my background. So I'm using a large flat soft head 1-inch brush to wet carefully around the leaves. So I always start off with sort of the lighter colours. So using my size 6 round brush here, just painting some of the orange wet into wet. This is going to be really sort of random. This is the kind of sort of fuzzy colours in the background. So just let yourself go and just see what happens. This is the burnt sienna. So this is kind of the pink and the violet. So as you can see, I'm working light to dark with the colours. So the sort of blue violet here is the darkest colour. And this is more damp into wet, still using the size 12 mop brush, so you can see I can get into those smaller areas, but it allows me to paint large areas as well. I'm painting the dark here, which I can see in the photograph as well, around that sort of leaf in the background and the star of the show just beneath. So again, just swipe lovely abstract marks and just keep loading your brush. And lots more sort of darks here, just here and there. And I'm pretty much painting damp into damp. So I'm using a little bit of green here, the Ultramarine with quinacridone gold, painting damp into damp here, using the tip of the brush. A little bit more of that blue violet here, makes a lovely colour. Now, if your paint isn't moving and it's just sitting there and not blending, just spritz it gently as I'm doing here with a spritzer bottle, just to get it moving, and tilt as well, just to get those colours blending. So you can leave your painting like this and sprinkle some salt on, allow it to dry naturally, or for those of you who want to experiment a little bit more, I'm going to start using some granulation fluid. So I am applying it with a pipette, just here and there, especially around the darker colours. You get some really amazing effects. So just sort of tilting now. So allow gravity to get that fluid working. And obviously sort of just mop off any sort of puddles there. I'm going to allow the painting to dry naturally. So for the fourth stage, I paint the leaves. I started with a light wash, and remember I've masked out the veins. Now if you didn't mask out the veins, don't worry, we're going to use some white gouache later in this tutorial. So I hope you're going to enjoy this bit. So I'm just painting the leaves with a yellow, Hansa yellow deep mixed with the Hansa yellow light, wet on dry, using my size 10 round brush. Really load that brush. And what I like is there's a little bit of sort of the background colour running in onto that. So it creates a bit of colour harmony and also doesn't make them look like cutouts, like a jigsaw puzzle. It looks more natural. So I'm using a little bit more of the Hansa Yellow Deep just here and there. So not one complete flat colour. So painting the star of the show here, damp into damp. Adding a little bit of alizarin crimson here as well, just to make this a little bit darker and warmer coming forward. Rinse my brush there, added some yellow to that crimson and red, and just sort of painting the top part of the leaf here, damp into damp with this warmer autumnal colour here. Adding and tickling the paint almost just here and there to add these colours, damp into damp just here and there, and dropping in a little bit of burnt sienna here, wet in wet, tilting and just sort of spattering some of that Hansa yellow deep there with my size 10 brush. And I'm sprinkling the salt onto the wet surface, and I'm using sandpaper and a watercolour pencil. Rubbing the tip of the watercolour pencil against the sandpaper releases the pigment onto the wet surface, and it kind of sets itself there. So it's quite a dark colour. You could use a dark brown or a black even. And I'm just using a sort of burnt sienna colour here and stippling onto the damp surface with the watercolour pencils. Fun to do. So I'm just using a size 2 round brush here, and I'm just painting some darks, damp into damp on the edge of the leaves there, just here and there, and you can see it in the photograph as well. So I'm using ultramarine and burnt sienna, and I'm just being as random as I can here, just to sort of create the sort of the edging of the leaves, just to make them look more natural here and there. So just making a puddle of ultramarine, burnt sienna and a pinch of pink, and I'm just spattering the damp surface using my size 10 round brush to create some more textures to finish off this stage. I'm going to allow the painting to dry naturally to allow the salt to work. So for this 5th stage, I remove the masking fluid. Make sure your painting is thoroughly dry before you do this, and brush off any salt. I build up the details on the leaves, adding texture and detail. I'm using a paper towel to remove the masking fluid. You can use a putty rubber or even your thumb. So as you can see there, it reveals a lovely sort of white light stems there. I'm using a small round brush. This is a size 2 round brush, and I've mixed up some ultramarine with a pinch of the quinacridone gold, very dilute. I'm just painting some shadows on the right hand side of those veins very carefully, and I'm going to use a clean damp brush just to soften and blend those lines. They look more natural. So I'm using my size 10 brush. It's a clean dilute brush, and I'm just sort of softening and blending some of the marks there just to push everything back there. But it's also to wet the leaves. So I'm just adding some warmer colours here, wet into wet. So it's another layer building up here, a little bit of orange here. And just on this leaf behind, I mixed up a red orange, and I'm blending and diluting with a clean damp or wet brush actually. So I'm using Brusho. Now, some of you may not have this or may not want to use it, and you don't have to use it. It can sort of produce kind of unexpected results, and it's hard to control the quantity. I'm tapping very gently here. So I'm going to allow my painting to dry naturally to allow everything to settle. So for this 6th stage, I want to bring out the stars of the show. So I'm going to paint sort of a dark wash around some of the outlines of the leaves there. What I'm going to do then is, when the paper is damp, I'm going to paint the background twigs damp into damp so that it looks like it's a bit further away, and that will create depth in the painting. So let's have a look. I'm using a large mop brush, and I'm painting gently wet on dry. I don't want to lose all that texture of the granulation fluid and the sort of tilting and the salt, etc. So I'm really diluting the paint, keeping it dark nearest to the leaves there. A little bit of orange here, and I'm just adding it just to kind of get some of those autumnal colours back just here and there. I felt I'd sort of spritz some of that away on my sort of earlier stage. So just adding a little bit more dark here, and then sort of diluting and blending and softening. Mixing up here a red orange and painting that damp into wet just at the bottom there, and I'm just going to tilt to allow those colours to mix and blend on the paper. And I'm just adding a little bit of that red orange to the left there. This is wet on dry, that's wet into wet. Rinsing my brush and then just softening and diluting with a clean wet brush. Again, tilting, adding darks, damp into damp there, on the left hand side using that large mop brush, still tilting, just to allow the colours to flow and blend, and giving it a little bit of help with my spritzer bottle as well, gently spritzing just where the wet paint is, trying to avoid the leaves and mopping up any excess paint. I'm painting the twig in the background to the left, damp into damp. Make sure your paint is damp and take that excess off. You don't want this to run. You just want it to have a soft edge so it recedes into the background there. So just using my size 8 round brush, do use the brush that you feel most comfortable with. And I've added a few extra twigs here in the foreground, damp into damp as well. I'm going to allow my painting to dry. For this 7th stage, I paint wet on dry a shadow colour on the leaves to make them look a little bit more 3D. I also spatter some bright colours as well, of course. So let's take a look. I'm gently painting wet on dry the shadow colour using my size 10 brush. I felt it was a bit too dark. I've added more water there, a little bit more water again. I want that yellow to be reflected through. Watercolour is a transparent medium, so we want to see that underpainting coming through. So again, this is a thin glaze, a very dilute colour. So even though the colour's got dark colours in it, to make it dark, it's got loads of water, so it's going to make it lighter and transparent so you can see the underpainting. So I'm going to allow the painting to dry. And for the final stage, the 8th stage, I paint the small branch going across the sort of foreground. I also use some white gouache to add some highlights and lights here and there, and of course a final spatter to finish off my painting. Let's take a look. So I'm painting this wet on dry with my size 6 brush across that leaf to push that leaf back a bit. You notice it goes around the star of the show. So it's telling a little bit of a story here. So just sort of painting this, really load your brush. Even if you're just painting details like this, you want the sort of paint to look translucent and vibrant. So I'm just sort of taking my time here, wriggling the brush to make it look more natural, these sort of twig, this branch here. And I am adding a few more darks to the veins. Again, I've turned my painting upside down using a small round brush, just using the Ultramarine with a pinch of yellow, wet on dry, just to paint some of these veins, the sort of shadows there, just to really sort of bring it to life. I'm spattering it onto the leaves to create light and texture, and I am just adding a little bit of white on its own and just painting some of the veins here. Lost them a little bit, lost the light, but this is helpful hopefully to those of you that don't have masking fluid, don't like using it. So just sort of painting the light veins, and it really brings again the leaves forward away from the background. Adding some yellow again to that white gouache and adding a few more lights here and there, wet on dry with my size 2 round brush. Take your time with this and make sure the painting is dry because it will make it pop even more. I'm also adding it to the edge of the leaves there. Again, to pull it away from that dark background and to sort of bring them to life a little bit more, adding the light. And it's especially helpful if you've lost some of your light. I do love using a few little white accents here to create light. So I'm just removing the washi tape to reveal a lovely white border, showing you all those lovely textures made by the granulation fluid and the spattering and the salt, etc. So I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial and that it inspires you to paint some autumn leaves, either using this photo reference or another, and trying out some of these different techniques. So I hope you have fun with it and experiment with it, especially the background. And remember, if anything goes wrong, especially in those first couple of stages, just wash off and have another go. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments section. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial. Happy painting. Bye for now.